Hello and welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Carrie Oderman with UATV. Today we are talking about the Minsk Accords, which were signed on September 5th, 5 years ago. The initial document consisted of 12 points. The first one, a complete ceasefire, was violated by Russian hybrid forces almost as soon as the document was signed. 5 years later, Russia still hasn't managed to comply with a single point of the initial Minsk Protocol, also referred to as Minsk I. To analyze the political and military obstacles to the implementation of the Minsk Accords, we're joined in the studio today by Maria Kucherenko, analyst at the Center for Civil Society Studies. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Not all of our viewers may be familiar with what the Minsk Accords means. Could you give us a quick overview before we go into detail?
Nowadays, Minsk Agreements are called the main frame of the conflict, but from my point of view, it is not right position to call it the main framework, because in Minsk Agreements we have clarification by this document that according to this document, the second side, the side of aggression, is so-called separate areas of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast. But in particular way, in the real life, the second side, the side of aggression, the source of aggression actually is Russian Federation, not these so-called separate areas of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast. But here in Minsk Agreements, we got such difficult situation as if we are talking about trilateral contact group, which is a subject of taking some decisions about the diplomatic field, about the negotiation on diplomatic level. The trilateral contact group consists of a Russian Federation, OSCE and Ukraine. But in the direct document we see that as a second side it's presented, there are presented the separate areas of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast, and Russian Federation is always trying to speculate on such issues, on such difficulties of understanding and reading of this document.
Now, the original document had 12 points. Was there any criteria set for what happens when it's violated?
Yeah, we got these points here, and all of these points actually were violated by Russian Federation. Because if we start from the very first one about the total ceasefire, we will see that even today we got 12 violation of ceasefire on the contact line. And if we turn to our trying to set a sustainable ceasefire, we will see that it haven't led us to sustainable peace, sustainable background for further negotiations. The position of Ukrainian side is that first should come the security, and after it all the political issues of Minsk Agreements, as it actually signed in this document. But the position of Russian Federation is that first we need to adopt political part of Minsk Agreements, and after it maybe they will provide us a security. And as it was mentioned by Kurt Volker, the representative of the United States in a negotiation in format Surkov-Volker, there's no politics at all without security. There's no elections without security. So it's a great contradiction which actually stop us from moving towards these agreements and moving us to follow it.
Now, it's been hard to enforce, but the original agreement was just weeks after the downing of the MH17 airline. It's not mentioned at all in the Minsk Accords. In your professional opinion, were the Minsk Accords a way of telling the rest of the international community that something's being done in the conflict, or is it unrelated?
You know, from my point of view, it's trying to just close an eye on the problem, just put a blind eye on what's happening after it, after the crash of Boeing. It was an Ilovaisk tragedy. It was a tragedy near the Novozovsk, near the Mariupol way, and this agreements was a result. This document was a result of our trying to to establish some ceasefire, to give an army a short break from this very, very active and very harsh action on a battlefield. So it was trying to present form, but without any sufficient decision about the conflict. So Minsk Agreements was a frame of so-called diplomacy of putting the Russian Federation outside of the real state of things, outside of understanding of all the world that it was an aggression by Russian Federation. It was not sort of civil war, as they said. And these agreements allow Russian Federation to stay in the position that they are only watchdog of this format. And it's the main problem here. And it was the main problem from the very beginning of these agreements.
Outside observers might say that the first Minsk agreements had very high-profile diplomats taking part in the discussions. And now in the past 5 years, lower and lower level diplomats are the ones attending the meeting. Can you tell me anything about that?
It's quite difficult to say something about the level of the diplomacy related to Minsk Agreements, because if we will turn to the activities of Russian Federation near the Minsk Agreements, if we will try to search some information about the Russian representatives except Gryzlov, we will haven't find anything, especially if it comes to some military aspects of Minsk Agreements, of some representatives of discussion in this level. If it will comes to some humanitarian aspects, we will not find any surnames at all from the Russian side, and that's why it's quite difficult to say something about their presence in this format. And what I need to say about the Ukrainian side, Ukrainian representation in Minsk format, it was very sad issue when Roman Besmertny was fired from the Minsk format as a representative of Ukraine, because he is a really strong diplomat with a special background, with a totally full understanding of all the aspects which comes especially to humanitarian and political aspects of future peace settlement.
Besmertny was there from the concept from day one of the Minsk Treaty. Now, with the new appointee, will there be a lot of catch-up work to do from the Ukrainian side?
Now, I think that now we should stop our illusions about this format at all, because it's not about the representatives, it's not about the personalities. From the very beginning, it's about the problems inside the text of these agreements. By that time, till we will not say that it was aggression of the Russian Federation, and by that time, till we haven't fixed it in some accords or documents and so on, it will be harder and harder to communicate productively in this format, because the representatives of Russian Federation always will say something like, oh, you need to have direct negotiations with so-called representatives of so-called LPR and DPR. And it's the main problem for Ukraine today.
Because by doing that, they also seem to be giving them validity, which is something that Ukraine definitely does not want to do. Now, you said the format might have been broken from the beginning, to paraphrase. Is that why President Zelensky is thinking about reshuffling the deck? He's spoken about having the UK and the US be involved in a new format, the new Normandy. What are your feelings on that?
I don't think that now it's high time to involve US in this format, because US policy is now totally concentrated on future elections, and it will be sort of populistic views presented in the diplomatical field, which is not an option for Ukraine. But if we are talking about the widening format of Normandy, it's one of the ideas which was discussed all these years, because if we will turn to the position of Russian Federation, they always want to discuss issues with US. It's their main goal to discuss issues with US. They just think that we are not a subject at all, and US is a real subject of the conflict, and here we got a conflict of interest between Russian Federation and US. So it can be one of formats which can lead us to some constructivity, but I don't think that now it's high time for this.
Now, Ukrainian-U.S. relations have been a little bit unpredictable in the last days and weeks, with Kurt Volker saying one thing and John Bolton saying another thing. Is there a danger for Ukraine to bring the U.S. into the Normandy format without knowing what they're going to get?
Yeah, I have said directly this, because if we don't have a coordination inside our country, and if US don't have a coordination inside their caucus, it's quite difficult to predict what will be actually going in Normandy format, and it's quite difficult to us now to understand what is the position of US according to this issue.
Well, the Minsk Treaty does not have a very good past, and maybe not the brightest future. That's all the time we have. Thank you very much for visiting with us today.
Thank you so much.
That was Maria Kucherenko, analyst for the Center for Civil Society Studies. Thank you, and stay tuned for more.